Now, back to Gavriel.
And this is Gavriel with you here on Israel National Radio, the real voice of truth for the real deal in the Middle East. And if you want to write, talk about it, you're always welcome to do that. Gavriel, Gavriel, at israelnationalradio.com. Now here's a story that is going to blow your mind, so hold on to your strymel or whatever, your babushka, your shaitel. Can you imagine a Christian pastor who becomes a messianic, has a messianic congregation, Jews for J we're talking about kind of quality, and then all of a sudden he comes to some startling revelations based on the scriptures and leads his congregation toward the Noachide movement. We're not talking about an individual decision, we're talking about a congregational decision. Well, that's what I stumbled across here in Singapore, of all places. Yeah, I'm still here. And I want you to meet the former pastor, former Reverend Paul Tan, that's T-A-N, and he joins us today to tell this amazing story of a migration of people out of Christianity, out of the Messianic movement, and now migrating into what we would call the Bnai Noach Movement with fascinating questions and amazing devotion. I actually met with the congregation this week on Shabbat together with Rabbi Abergel from here in Singapore. So, Paul Tan, welcome to Israel National Radio.
Thank you, Gavriel.
How'd you find me, by the way? Because you reached out to me.
I have always been listening to the Israel National Radio. And when I stumbled across your program, I've been listening to it diligently. And then I realized that you came to Singapore. And so that's where I started to be in contact with you and wanted to find out, if you're still in Singapore, whether I could host you as a good Singaporean. And I suppose that's how we met. And because I realized that you had also very similar past with me as a Christian minister, having become an Orthodox Jew, I really wanted to find out from you, what's your process like, and whether what should my congregation do? Should we become a Jew, or are we moving into the Noahide movement?
It's a really complex set of questions that you've been through. Let's maybe step back a little bit and talk about kind of where things happen for you, like as a pastor, and what some of there's like 2 or 3 very distinct stages of growth that have brought you to where you are today. Could you give us some of the highlights of what that migration has been like? How did it start? And how did you get to where you are?
Well, I have been a Christian pastor for about 7 years or so, and round about the end of my service in the Christian church, I felt some dissonance, because if Christianity really has its roots in Judaism, then my basic question is why does Christianity not have any Hebraic expressions of worship? And then when I went to Israel and I met with people in the land, and I came back, I even felt a greater dissonance. There's just some disconnection between the Christian church and the people of Israel. And so that began my quest, around about 2000 or so, and I resigned from my church, and I went on to a solo journey of discovery, and in the process I stumbled into Messianic Judaism. I was interested in it. I found out more. I even enrolled myself in a master's degree in theology, majoring in Messianic studies, and I felt confident enough to then start a Messianic congregation in 2002. When it first started, there were only about 12 of us or so, and the congregation grew because those who came to the congregation were people who also felt some disconnection that the church has with Judaism, with the Jewish people, because the people who come seems to have a love for Hashem, a love for the study of the Torah, and love for the nation of Israel, and love for anything that is Jewish. But I suppose Hashem began to filter people out in the process. In the last 6 years, many have come, many have also left, because in the early stage of our growth, we decided that JC is not God. And I think that shocked a lot of people, and people began to think that, we are a cult group, and therefore they have distanced themselves away from us. And, well, the remaining of us continue in our journey. Right now we have about 30 who are fervent believers in Hashem and the Torah and love the Israel people. Last year I brought all of them to Israel, and we have a great time just visiting the places. And I think every visit to Israel confirms that we need to go back to the roots, so to speak. And in the process, sometime this year, I made a startling announcement that not only is JC not God, I've come to the conclusion that JC is not even the Messiah of Israel. And I think that even shocked my right-hand man who left us with his family, because he loves God, he loves us, his belief. I'm very sad to see him leave, but I think we need to continue on with our journey. And so the remaining of us continue to ask ourselves this question. Okay, we have moved out of Christianity, we have gone into Messianic Judaism, and Paul, now you're telling us that there's no JC is not God, no Messianic Judaism, so where do we go from here? And so I think this is the process that we're working at, and I came to see Rabbi Abijel, our synagogue rabbi in Singapore, and he said, Paul, you don't have to become a Jew. You can be a non-Jew and yet perfectly in partnership with the Jews to bring about the Messianic era. And although I'm not entirely new to this Noahide movement, but I'm not sure. I felt so, lack of confidence in myself. I don't know much about it. I don't have a master's in theology or Noahide studies. But I brought the news back to my people, the congregation, and we talked about it, and we have a lot of questions about it, and they asked me questions like, Paul, are you sure we're now not moving into a man-made movement? We are so tired of the deceptiveness of Messianic Judaism, and not that we doubt the Noahide movement, but Paul, can you give us more facts so that we can wear it out? And so for the last couple of months, I have asked the congregation to visit noahidenations.com, asknoah.org, and we have been studying and we have been reading, and we came to the point where we felt that we really needed Rabbi Abijel's help. We needed a Jewish scholar. We needed somebody who can lead us in the right direction, because we do not want to end up going to something we are unsure of. The analogy given is that, we have swam away from the beach. The other time, when we first left Christianity, we have swum away from it, and we're now in the midst of the sea, and we're swimming, and we have now climbed onto a rock. We are all crouched there, all waiting what to do next. Will there be a boat that will come around? And I think it's quite a fitting analogy, and a boat will be Noah's Ark.
That's really, really phenomenal. I want to go back to one of the issues inside of what you just said, because you can say it today almost academically. I know, though, that underneath it there was a huge element of what I call emotional equity that was on the line here. When you said the statement that you didn't believe that JC is God anymore, or Messiah, that couldn't have been based just on a whimsical kind of a thought. It had to come from something that was considered. You are well versed in Messianic theology, with some of the major leaders, of course, that are exponents of that. I won't mention their names here, but we both know who we're talking about. One in particular who's written a 4-volume series on the subject that seems to be the great answer to all objections. And yet, nevertheless, though you knew all of those answers, so to speak, you persisted and you came through. I don't want to reduce this to something overly simplistic, because I don't like it when people ask me the question of what was the one thing that convinced you to become a Jew. I usually say cholent, but are there 2 or 3 things revolving around the statement that you made, that you no longer believe that JC was deity or the Messiah? There are a couple of things in that area that you can share with us that were part of that letting go process. How'd you come to that?
Well, I agree with you. I have studied that 4 series book, and I know the apologetics from a Messianic point of view against this whole thing about Judaism and JC is the Messiah. I suppose it all began when the more I studied about this author's views, the more I realized that he is still very Christian in his thinking. Although he claims to be a Messianic Jew, and he has understanding of so-called some of the ancient texts, and he makes reference to it, but I felt that he is using the ancient texts to support his case. If he really believes in the ancient texts of the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Gemara, then surely why doesn't he believe everything about it? Why must he only be picking certain aspects of the Talmud just to speak for Christianity? So when I realized that many of his arguments are still very Christian, lacking an authentic Jewish perspective of things, I began to doubt many of the things that he has spoken. And for me personally, I think one of the greatest struggle, among many other arguments about the fact that if JC is the Messiah, then when he came the first round, all the things that's prophesied about Messiah should have happened. But when JC came, nothing happened. And so the Christian cleverly used a second coming of the JC to answer everything. I think this is a very ridiculous approach to it. I struggled for almost 2 years before I finally came to the conclusion that JC is not the Messiah, is Isaiah 53. Year after year in the Christian church, we have been taught that, he was the one who was pierced for our transgressions, by his stripes we are healed. We have this messianic Seder at the Pesach that lift up the matzah and see all the holes and pierced, and people will make reference to that. For years I've been doing that. But for 2 years I struggled with Isaiah 53 because I asked myself, is Isaiah 53 really about a person, or is it about the nation of Israel? We have always been taught in seminary and in any Bible teaching that we have always got to go back to the context. We have always got to look at what happens before and what happens after before we decide what's the context about. And Isaiah 53, for 2 years I struggled with. I tried to see it from a Christian perspective. I tried to see it from a Messianic perspective. I tried to see it from the Jewish perspective. I find that the best is to look into the context. And the context really for Isaiah 53 is not about an individual person per se, but it's about the nation of Israel. The suffering servant in Isaiah 53 is not about JC. It's about the nation of Israel. And when I discovered that, I just said, there's no way I'm going to believe in all these things that people have deceptively put together to draw us away from a better understanding of the Jewish people and their place in Hashem's plan. And we non-Jews should wake up and read the scriptures in context. And so when I realized that was the key point for me, when I realized that Isaiah 53 cannot be speaking about JC as the Jewish Messiah.
We're speaking with Paul Tan. He's a former pastor here in Singapore, was a leader of a Messianic congregation, and more recently he's led that congregation, amazing group of people, by the way, that have stuck with him through this, into for them, the uncharted waters of the Noachide movement. And we're talking about this transition, what it's meant to them. I had the privilege, of course, of being with all of you yesterday, together with Rabbi Abergel, to just, we came with no agenda, just to listen and to share whatever we could that would be a point of chizuk, of strengthening to them. I was impressed with a number of things. First of all, such a warm, you could see it in their eyes, a warm and loving people. You could see there was a palpable sense of their love for Hashem. I could also see in their questions that they asked, their not just curiosity, but their learning. And a couple of people in particular who had familiarity with Rashi and with elements of the Gemara, and who were really earnest in their search. I know that doesn't come easily, and it come with a great price that all of you have paid. I don't know that the Jewish community even can begin to appreciate the amazing work that you've all done, because of a number of historical issues that would make the Jewish community a bit insular, let's say, and a bit defensive on certain matters. And yet we've all davened, we've all been praying for this day to come, when 10 men of all the nations of the earth would grab a hold of the edge of a garment of a Jew, as you quoted yesterday from Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, and they would say, we want to go with you. We hear God is with you. And it's a wake-up call, really, for the Jewish people to say, wait a minute, we're light to the nations means that somebody might show up, and the light's on, and that there is somebody home in this case. Where do you go with all of this?
Gavriel, I have asked Rabbi Abergel at the meeting yesterday, and I think if we ever move into the Noachide movement, or if we are even considered to be Noachides, I think one of the things we really need to request the Jewish community is that tell us what's our identity. We are now like orphans, abandoned by many people who claim to have embraced us, but when we realize that they are really not our natural parents, we felt abandoned. And so we are in this state of limbo. We don't know where to go. And so even if theoretically we know everything about Noachides, we accept everything about the teachings of Noachide, but there's one plea from all of us, at least in my congregation, is that how are we to be integrated into the local synagogue? Are we seen as some strangers How are we to be integrated? How are we to be together in partnership? Not that we take over the Jewish people. How can we in partnership with the Jewish people bring about the Messiah? I mean, in our own ways as non-Jews. I mean, how can we participate in some of the things that the Jewish people do? How can we, to what extent can we observe the Shabbat, the Mo'adim, the study of the Torah, and even our attendance at the synagogue and Shabbat services, and or some of the and other important occasions, and even burial? Can Noahide be buried in a Jewish cemetery? I mean, these are questions that we ask, and these are questions we sincerely ask the Jewish authority to really consider. I mean, if Noahide movement is something that is in the heart of every Jew, to bring this message to the world, then there are a lot of practical implications that we as Noahides would like to know and would like to be a part of the Jewish community. Do not treat us as an outcast or as a stranger, because like Zechariah 8:23, we want to reach out to you. We want to touch the garment of one Jew, 10 men in one Jew, and to be led to the house of Hashem.
Well, this is hearing it, I think, ladies and gentlemen, from a heart of a man who he was officially a pastor. And I know this by my own experience, that once you've had a pastoral heart, caring for people, that doesn't go away, the caring component. And I've seen it in terms of how your people responded to you with great gratitude. I know it's been very difficult. I think it's interesting, in America, if you make a big change like this, you can move away. When you're in a place as small as Singapore, which is about the size of Brooklyn, really, there's not a whole lot of places you can move, and your visibility is still there, and you run into old people that you knew, and it's just not so simple because the geographics of your life don't shift that much, while you've had a major tectonic shift in your spiritual being. That's got to be tough. I know that for you, this is a work in progress. I know it's something I'm personally interested in. It's Hashem. I plan to help as I can, at least making some connections and helping you get to the next level on who you can access that can give you guidance, whether it's from New York or whether it's from Israel, or even the local resources that you've been able to tap now here in Singapore. Is there anyone in the congregation who, that's just, you could say in a general way, something about their own story, their own transition? Because I know what it's been like for you. We've had some conversations offline about this, but one or two other people that you could talk about just as we bring this to a close. What's it been like for the women in the congregation, for example?
Well, many of the women in our congregation and the men in our congregation, we all have the similar path in our quest into Noahides or even Judaism. There is just a sense of disconnection. When we were a Christian, we felt that there was a disconnection as a Christian with Judaism. I suppose it was this dissonance that caused every one of us in our congregation. If you interview all my congregation members, they will tell you that they just somehow feel that there is a gap, and they went on a quest. And we are still on a quest. And we hope that the Noahide movement will be the ultimate place for many of us, and perhaps some of us who would like to move a little bit further will move into a Jew.
Well, I did ask of the 30 people yesterday, by a show of hands, how many would consider that. It was at least a third. And it's possible, I know this happens, that we have very sincere Christians that listen to this program, Christian Zionists listen to this program. The congregation that you started with, you would have defined it very clearly as born again, evangelical, charismatic, gifts of the Spirit, outreaching. You were part of the big outreach here, Love Singapore outreach, a major national push to bring people into to get saved, basically. I mean, these are all the things that were going on here. I mean, sometimes it gets leveled at me. I'm in contact with some people from my previous life, and sometimes they say to me, if they have enough chutzpah, well, maybe you were never really saved to begin with. Do you get that?
Of course. I mean, people will just come and tell us that, we have gone over the edge, we are crazy, and maybe our first belief was never really a belief in God. Upon looking back, I think that Hashem has always been very merciful to us. And even though we had gone into something that is completely not according to His plan, He has deposited something very earnest in our spirit. Some people call it the Jewish soul. Some people call it a kind of a drawn. We just knew that we were not satisfied with whatever the teachings that were given at the church. There was something amiss. I think that's Hashem's way of leading and calling us out so that His name will be sanctified.
If someone listening would like to connect with you, Paul, and obviously this is an internet-based radio program, so that's the best way to do it. Is there an email address that someone could write to you?
Well, you could write to ssf.admin@gmail.com. ssf.admin@gmail.com.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Paul Tan. He's the leader of a very brave group of Singaporeans here. I think we had everybody that in the congregation, with the exception of one who's German. Everybody else is of ethnically Chinese. Amazing, amazing people. Just there's a vibrancy and a love that's unquenchable there. I was just so overwhelmed by it. And if you happen to come to Singapore, it's something well worth seeing. They gather together on Shabbat afternoon, about 3 o'clock at a local hotel. And I hope some of you listening that have been through a similar journey will reach out to Paul, at least let him know that you're out there and have been through something like this, and that you could speak a word of encouragement to him as well. Paul, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your faith and your courage and your indomitable spirit that wants to go the whole distance. May Hashem be with you in all your thoughts, your words, your deeds. And may we have other occasions to update and shadow this path that you're all walking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gavriel. Thank you.
Got a question or a comment for Gavriel? Send him an email right now at Gavriel